We have to stay on the main road! Main road!
Em derecho! We go!
You don't have to do this. They aren't there anymore.
Suhana, go. Mama and Papa tốt.
Yes, they're dead.
Hi, I'm Mark Harris. I'm a film historian and writer for New York Magazine, and I'm here today talking to Paul Greengrass, the co-writer and director of News of the World. Paul, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, Mark. Very good to be here with you.
You know, that scene that we just saw, there's the sense, of course, of great tragedy and violence having happened, but the scene itself struck me as one of the gentlest scenes and one of the quietest scenes that you've ever filmed. So can you talk a little bit about your thinking behind that?
Well, I think the idea in my mind with this film was that all the the violence had occurred well before the film started. All those kind of profound experiences that both characters had gone through, in other words, the little girl and the kidnap and the from her initial family, and then, you know, later the killing of her Kiowa family, that all occurs before the film starts. Ditto kids' experiences in the Civil War and what, you know, the story of what's happened to his wife, that also has all occurred. And I wanted to make the film that way because it threw the focus, I hope, or throws the focus, I hope, on the journey out of the bitter times, out of the division, out of the pain, if I can put it that way, so that the journey becomes accounting for the past, and you only understand the past through watching those characters confront it. It's wordless, you know, and that's what that scene is for the little girl. She's going back to a memory that for her has become vivid as the journey has gone on. But it's all about stillness. It's all about just her. You know, the wind, the light playing on her face through that canvas, you know, broken curtain. And that, I think, gives it a sort of truthfulness in a way. And I think a tremendous burden rests on her as an actor. I mean, Helena, she has to convey that story just through her face. And she does it. It's all in her eyes.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that because, you know, I thought of Captain Phillips, where you had Tom Hanks, an experienced actor who certainly understands what the camera can do, and often you had him paired on screen with a much newer actor, and again this time you're not only working with a new actor, but with a child. What was that like for you working with her?
Do you know, I had tremendous anxiety at the start of the process. I thought the big problem was going to be to find a young girl who could go toe to toe with Tom and carry that part in the way that it needs to be done. It turned out to be the easiest decision. She'd just done System Crasher, which you probably know. It's a wonderful German film, and she was wonderful in that. And then I met her and we did some work together for a day. I had no doubts about her. I mean, you know, there was a little anxiety going into the first day. You know, you go, well, how's this going to work? But she was so strong from the first day that I actually never really thought of her as a child. Of course, she was a child, and you know, you were aware of it, you know, off camera, as it were. But when she was performing, she had just such great confidence. There was a moment in this particular scene, I remember we did a take, and I adjusted James, the operator's movement, so that she went the other way around and we rotated in the opposite direction. And I was explaining this to James and to Darius, what I wanted, and she was standing off to one side. She said, oh, yes, she said, I understand. So I will wait until the camera's moved around, and this is when I will make sure that I display the emotion, she said. Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, she had a tremendous confidence in her acting ability, and rightly so, I think.
Well, one thing I really love about what you did with that scene is that it's such a delicate act of physical choreography, because, of course, we're very much with her as she walks into that empty space, but you also really want to give us the space itself and the room to imagine the terrible things that happened there, and for us also to understand that she's imagining it. So, and as you said, it's all really silent. So, you know, it must have been a really interesting challenge to know how much time you could give yourself to let that play out in a realistic way.
Look, you know, the truth about directing is you're given tremendous credit for credit that belongs to your team, in truth. And this is an example of that. You know, the cinematography is magnificent. You know, the what Darius captures, the light, the play of the light, the naturalness of it. You know, the depth of the shadow, just enough, not too much. The operating, superlative. You know, so sensitive. The design, David Crank's design, you know, that's just it. You believe it. It's dressed so beautifully and so simply, and you believe that it's that place. The music, James Newton Howard's score, which is exquisite, and just the way the music doesn't lead you. It's so important, you know, such an important element to the scene, and yet you feel she moves and draws the music. It's not the music pushing her and we the audience. It's her motion that draws the music in, and it's so exquisitely subtle, I think, and yet so beautiful. So, you know, I mean, I could talk about the makeup, exquisite, because her face looks what it would be, weather-beaten, lived, you know, but not excessively so, just subtlety everywhere. So I think all these things have to come together when you make films. And, you know, as the director, there's a saying, you just have to get out of the way of people very often when it's going to happen, when it's right, when people have done the work. The costume is so perfect, isn't it? It sits, the shade of that dress is not too intense. It sits in the palette of that landscape perfectly. It's a child's dress, and yet it's not too childish. You know what I mean? Those choices are so subtle, and get any of them wrong in any of those areas, and the scene is not what it is. And I was very, very lucky on this film to have all that really creative excellence. You know, every day people brought it to work, and people loved making that movie. Loved being in that landscape. Loved its echoes of the Searchers. You know.
Well, I wanted to talk about that because I know that you're an old movie aficionado like I am, and you know, one word that I've heard people who love this movie use over and over again to describe it is classical. It's not a throwback. It is a very modern movie in its way, but the blood of previous movies runs through it in a really moving, to me, way. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what was spooling through your mind as you worked on this.
Well, I mean, Five came back, to be honest, you know, because John Ford, you know, your wonderful book and that project, and that, of course, that made me rewatch all Ford's movies again. I mean, obviously, I watched them many times, but I hadn't watched them in a block like that. It was a couple of years later that I read the novel, News of the World. But as soon as I read the novel, I thought of the Searchers. You know, it's really the Searchers in reverse, isn't it? You know, in the Searchers, Wayne goes out to find the girl in the desert. In this, Hanks finds the girl at the front of the film, and the journey is the attempt to try and bring her home, or to what he thinks is her home. And I thought that was really interesting because it provided the sort of classical Western narrative, you know, very common, isn't it? And yet it enabled the film to traverse a more modern landscape, or a landscape that was both classically Western but also resonant of today. Perhaps put it like that would be better. And I loved that. And I wanted, I suppose, to reference the Searchers most explicitly in this scene, and obviously particularly that shot when you look out through the shack at the two of them together. And I loved that, because the truth is, when you make a Western, you're clambering imperfectly up the shoulders of many giants, but particularly Ford, and there was a time, I can't remember what scene we were shooting. We were out in the desert. It was late one afternoon. The light was beautiful, and I was sitting down as they prepared the shot with James Newton Howard, who did the score, with Billy Goldenberg, who cut the film so beautifully. Gary Getzman and Greg Goodman were there, the producers, and we were chatting. And there was something about the light and the landscape and the wagons and the horses. You kind of felt that you could feel Papa Ford out there, do you know what I mean, calling to you. And we actually started giggling, like school kids, because there was something wonderful about working in this mythic genre that's so much part of it's one of the central pillars of American narrative cinema, isn't it? And it's the idea that we were trying in our small way to breathe a bit, some new life into it was both boyish, but it liberated the inner child in you, but also inspired us, I think, and that's why I think there was such tremendous work by all those wonderful people, because to work in that genre is to feel yourself close to the masters of the past, you know what I mean, in a way that in a more contemporary landscape is harder to feel, if I put it that way.
Right. Although one thing I really love about it is that, we so often tend to divide Westerns into traditional Westerns and revisionist Westerns. And I don't think you can easily place News of the World in one category or another, because it does have all these traditional values. And yet it isn't a movie that would have been made in the 1940s or 1950s.
I think, when you make a movie, you've got to be true to what's in your heart, I grew up with Westerns as a boy. They were always on television, of course, in the UK. But also, I experienced living in troubled times as you do in your country. I think we are in very, very difficult, divided, bitter times. And so to make a film that the purpose of which was predicated on the idea that there are better days to come, that we will find our way out of this, that's really what brought me to it. I wanted to make a film for my kids about what that road might feel like. I didn't know it was going to be News of the World. I didn't know it was going to be a Western. But now I look back on it, after it's finished, I see that there's something both comforting and inspiring to go to core genres and feel the power of them, feel the truth of them, feel them animate you towards better days. And when that scene finishes, the scene we're talking about, and she comes outside and she comes hesitantly towards Kid, and she takes his hand, and she asks him if her parents are dead, and they are, and he says they are, and she takes his hand. It's the first time they've touched, and they move off, and it feels so affecting to me, the acting there from both of them, because it's a recognition. It's not sentimental. It's not. It gives appropriate weight to the pain and the grief and the difficulties of the past, and yet it's a step towards reconnection, and the rest of the film really starts to develop that idea. And so that was what was in my heart. That's what the genre sustained me in that feeling, if I can put it that way.
Paul Greengrass, thank you so much. News of the World, a beautiful movie. Thanks for spending time with us.
Thanks, Mark.